Alrighty. I want to thank everyone for coming out today. Seeing everyone come in so early, like really warms my heart. So glad that you guys are all here. If this is your first time figuring out what this all is, let me tell you a little bit. So my name is Donald Harris. I've been in the games industry well over 15 years, coming up on 20 years. And I started this organization called ATX Game Makers. And what ATX Game Makers does is it works with the community to help increase the diversity in the games industry. So our organization mentors, we do resume reviews, portfolio reviews, all these things to help people who look different, come from different backgrounds, have financial backgrounds that are different, get into the games industry. And so you can find out more about that organization at atxgamemakers.com. And then the place where we are right now, we are being hosted by the lovely folks at Worsta. So Worsta is an organization that does Google services. So they go beyond the Google services as well as helping with data migration and other data services as well. And then this side of the building is their Web3 arm. So it's called Worsta Collabs. So anything Web3 and NFTs, you can definitely speak to these folks here, get a lot more information. What I want to do today is introduce our first speaker. It's a longtime friend of mine. I used to work for him, as we were saying, like over a decade ago. So it's really freaking cool to be able to like introduce someone that I used to work for and like literally help me get my foothold in this industry. His name is Anthony Castoro, and he is currently the CEO of HiDef. You can come on up, Anthony. HiDef Studios, we have, I'm sorry? Protagonist Games, and then Simulation Theory. Very busy man. And so he's here today to talk about building a diverse team from a leadership perspective. And so why this, just as a preface to this talk, is why this could be all very valuable to you. Even if you're not in a leadership position, you definitely want to know what the leadership team thinks and how they are going to be approaching diversity and hiring people who come from different backgrounds. So without further ado, Anthony?
Thank you. Am I gonna stand? Is this like stand-up comedy style, or do I sit?
Yeah, you should be comfortable. It's too hard.
Yeah, okay, all right. I'll hang out here. Good morning. Welcome. I'm a longtime Austinite, but I currently reside in the San Diego area. But I went to the University of Texas, and I worked 20 years in the game industry in Austin, and so I moved out about 5 years ago. But I'm always looking to help support and be connected to the Austin Game Makers scene, and big round of applause for Donald for what he does for that community and everything that's going on here. So look, you know, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself so you know where my perspective, and then talk about my approach to diversity. And this can be interactive, so if you have questions or anything, feel free to raise a hand or just shout at me, I don't care. So I'm going to talk about the 3 C's of building a diverse organization from a leadership perspective. And see if I can remember what they are. The first one is Castoro, that's me. I'll explain that in a second. The next one is cast, a wide net. Like, it takes work and effort for an organization to find different people. It's easy to find the people who are just around you. And the third is culture. And if you're gonna have a successful organization that embraces diversity and embraces all kinds of different people, you have to have the kind of culture that allows that and allows people who are different to come into an organization and feel like part of a team. That doesn't just happen, right? So the first C is Castoro, and that's just to give you a little context about my background. So as Donald said, currently I'm involved in 3 main companies. HiDef is a startup that's pretty high profile. My partners are Rick Fox, Jace Hall, and Dr. David Washington, 4 biracial founders in the video game business. Not very common. Rick, Jace, and I are all half Italian and half black. So that's a coincidence, but unusual, right? So, my background, so my parents. My dad was a poor Italian kid from Brooklyn. My mom was a sort of middle-class African-American woman from Arkansas. And my dad got a full ride to Howard University, and he didn't know that it was an HBCU. When he got there, he found out that it was HBCU. He's an Italian kid from Brooklyn, So he's like, okay. And he went there, he got a degree in chemistry, met my mother. So my dad's a chemist, and my mom's a romance novelist. And so I grew up in Texas as a mixed race kid with, I think, probably a fairly unique experience and outlook on life. And so the way I see people, we're all basically the same. The same basic fundamentals, and it's actually the differences between us that make us interesting and powerful, right? If we were all homogenous and literally the same, it wouldn't be that interesting. So, but we all have really basic, similar fundamental drivers, and my perspective on that, on looking at people and being able to see every individual as valuable and equal in value, is important. And it gets me in trouble sometimes because I work with a lot of famous people and powerful people, and I just don't care. And so sometimes that gets me in trouble because I'm not deferential enough. But I think it's also one of my strengths as a leader in that I care just as much about the new QA person as I do about someone who's had 25 years of experience in the industry or is a famous singer or whatever, because ultimately we're all just people. And a lot of times our success is as much happenstance as it is what that individual person put into it, right? So it's actually pretty interesting watching the Academy Awards last night and seeing some of the people winning and, realizing how human each one of them are. Like, it's easy to put people up on a pedestal, but, I've worked with a ton of well-known artists and game makers and all kinds of interesting folks, and ultimately you realize we're all just people. Like, we all have the same worries, we all have the same concerns, we all want to be valued. So that's the first C is me, my perspective. So when I got into the industry, I was at the University of Texas, so I was a sophomore. I was undiagnosed extreme ADHD, so I wasn't doing so great overall in college, and I really got into video games. And I dropped out and I started a company and sort of never looked back. It wasn't easy, it wasn't successful at first, but I got into the industry and I met all kinds of amazing people in the 90s. So I think my first job was a QA guy at Origin, a studio that used to be really important here in this community. Got to work on Wing Commander 3 and this game that eventually became Ultima Online, which at the time I think was called Multima. And what I found in the game community was already an amazing diversity of people. There were trans people working at Origin in the mid-90s. Like, I don't know if anyone even thinks about that, but it wasn't even a thing. And that's what I love about this industry. It's one of the reasons I'm here. So that's the C in Castoro. The next C is cast a wide net. So, you have to send signals to the community that you want diverse organization. You want people with different perspectives. And why do you want that? Like, especially in the game industry, I think it's critical. It's important because if you think about what is creativity, what is a creative act, right? The idea of creativity is that you take two ideas that were not previously connected and you put them together and you have something original. Well, the best way to find ideas that haven't been connected before, right, is to find people with different experiences, different thoughts, different ideas, different backgrounds, and bring them together in a constructive way. And suddenly you breed that creativity, that originality. And that's really important in our industry, because if we don't do that, then we're going to end up with a lot of the same stuff over and over and over again, right? So I'll give you an example of how challenging that can be to cast that wide net. So when I started Heatwave, which is the company that Donald and I work together at, as a biracial founder, and actually we were eventually, I did a Series A. We were funded by an all-black VC firm, the oldest all-black VC firm in the country out of DC. We wanted to try to recruit more minorities, more diverse people into the industry, and this is 2007, 2008. And we sent, recruiting posters and contacted people at all the HBCUs. We thought that was the first place to start. Why not do that? And we offered internships, paid internships to people who were interested in learning about the game industry. And we got 0 applications, which I was stunned by, right? It's like, wait, what? So we started to investigate. Why weren't we getting applications to work there? And we found that a lot of the students who are at HBCUs, they had expectations from their parents, and again, this is 2008, 2009, that they were gonna get a real job, right? The game industry wasn't a real job. That's changed in the last decade to some degree, but we didn't understand the audience that we were trying to recruit from. So when you cast that wide net, it's like, I guess the metaphor is we were using the wrong net, right? We have to actually go to the HBCUs, talk to people who are attending there, and find out, if they even understand what we're trying to do when we're recruiting them. What can they tell their parents about, hey, if you're a software engineer and you come work at a video game company, you can make whatever you can make. Like, oh, we started $80,000. That was a lot of money in 2008, 2009. But people didn't understand that. So there's this outreach, this education that goes into casting that wide net. And the same goes for all forms of diversity. So I'll use a lot of examples about African American or minority, but when we talk about diversity, I'm talking about all perspectives in all areas of life. But if you stay sort of working with the people you know in the communities you're already in, then you're just gonna get the same kinds of people over and over again. So as a leader, I have to make it a priority for the organization to cast that net, right? So that's the other aspect about it. From a leadership perspective, it's not the kind of thing where it's like, oh, we're gonna have a diversity, organization, and we're gonna hire a person whose job it is to make sure we have diversity and we care about diversity and inclusion, but rather that is intrinsic to who we are, not external to who we are. It needs to be incorporated in what we do. And so all the organizations that I'm involved with, we try to make that central to the theme as we cast that net. And so now, with the 3 companies that I'm involved with, I think we have done a really good job of trying and bringing in people with different perspectives. At HiDef, which is the sort of thing you can learn the most about probably online if you Google HiDef, we have 4 biracial founders, but we also have a woman who's the head of publishing, who's also one of the leaders in the LGBTQ plus community. And when you look at that team, you see a really native group of people who come from all kinds of backgrounds. Some aren't from games. We've made it really a key component of the organization to recruit and bring people in, and that brings us to the 3rd C, which is culture. And again, you could have an organization that casts a wide net. You can have a perspective from a leadership perspective, like I do, of valuing the differences in people and how you can bring different cultures together or different backgrounds together. But if you don't create the right kind of culture in an organization, and this is a big topic, so we don't have time to go through all of it, you can bring a bunch of people with different perspectives in, but if people don't feel like they can be heard, if they can't bring their perspective, their thoughts, their ideas into the community pool and know that they'll be heard, then it doesn't matter how diverse the organization is, you don't have a diverse team that's working together. And that's an area where I think a lot of organizations are challenged because culture comes from the top. And I don't mean that the people who aren't at the top of the organization have no power. I mean, if the people at the top of the organization don't understand this and don't buy into creating a culture of transparency, of openness, and of respect, then no matter how much the rest of the team wants to have that, right, you're going to end up with a culture that's confused, or a bunch of people who are frustrated because the leader comes in and behaves in a way that everyone's like, what? I thought we were trying to do something else. I actually see that happen a lot. So from a leadership perspective, this is going to sound stupid, but if you think about what does leadership mean? What does it mean to lead, right? It means to go first, right? Like if you're leading a horse, right? You're walking in front of the horse. And in order for culture to really take hold in an organization, the people at the top of the organization have to actually believe it. They actually have to live it. They have to demonstrate it for the team, and they have to be willing to go out on a limb and show people that when you say, hey, we actually want everyone's input, and then someone from the group asks a hard question, you actually take the question and you try to understand why that question's being asked and make everyone feel safe that they could ask a hard question, right? Well, that's one of the great things about the game industry is if you look at all the people who are here and their backgrounds and their differences, you have a Make America Great Again hat on, right? Like, so you're gonna have all kinds of different people with different perspectives come into this community, and each person is valuable, each person matters, and you wanna ask yourself, okay, well, what perspective does that person have, and why, and how can we add that to what we're building from a creative standpoint to create an amazing outcome? So that's my 3 C's for creating diverse teams and understanding how to, as a leader, really invest in bringing in diverse developers, diverse teams, so that you can create experiences that really connect with audiences who, as we know, become more and more diverse. And you're not going to be able to do that if you don't think about it, invest in it, and have an organized strategy for it. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Do you want to do any questions? Or?
Do we have any questions?
Games engage people the way life doesn't. And if you were to imagine how you would create a game, or protagonist game, however you want to call it, based on what you just mentioned, 3 C's, what would that look like?
It's a game design challenge. I like it. So my first thought would either be some kind of RPG or some kind of simulation, team building simulation where you create an objective that you're trying to meet, and you have to recruit people with different perspectives and different needs. If you think about The Sims and the way needs are driven, you come up with different backgrounds for the entities, different points of view, different things that they value, and make it an interesting challenge to try to figure out how to manage the rules and the interactions of those players to let them achieve the objective that you set out. So I really like simulation games, and everything from RimWorld to The Sims or whatever. And I think there are a lot of systems out there that I would play that game. I'd spend some time thinking about that. It's a good question. You have any thoughts about it?
Yeah. I thought so. So I'm not really supposed to go beyond the speakers, so I'm hoping it won't feedback.
Just a quick follow-up. How would you build out the outcomes, if you will, based on the user interactions for how they would like, for instance, if you give them a list of people that they're recruiting from to pick diverse candidates, how would you build out what the outcomes look like for whether they're winning or whether it's engaging them on the level that you're trying to produce?
So I think you could accidentally get really into the personality trait management aspect of a game like that. But if you really want to focus on the concept of diversity and the outcomes, then what I would say is you would want to create an algorithm that lets you say the better you do the casting a net and the culture building aspects of the simulation, the better the end result product they build and the audience reaction to that product is. And so maybe, taking those kinds of, like, what's the leadership character traits, the first C, like Castoro, the second C of the recruiting aspect of it, and the third C of the culture that you're trying to build and the rules that you put in place, and then maybe how you respond to issues that happen in the team, and whether you're reinforcing that culture in one way or another or damaging that culture. And then over time, they create a product, and then you see the product result, and maybe you have like annual cycles of that or something. So that's my thought. Any other questions? You might have to shout it out. I don't know.
Yeah, because I think it might feedback if I go.
All right, so you said that if people don't feel like they can be heard no matter how much diversity you have, and then I didn't get the rest. And I loved that, what you said. And could you repeat that bit, because it's great. And then if you have any advice for helping others feel heard, I'd love to hear that too. Thank you.
So again, I come at this from a leadership perspective. So if you, and I've been through this cycle a little bit, and I'm lucky, or maybe I'm not lucky. I decided to go create companies again because I got tired of working at shitty companies with bad leaders. Right? So I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna go do it. I've done it before. It's hard. I was a little bit depressed honestly, after Heat Wave and the way some of those things went down. We won't get into that. But I took a 7-year hiatus, something like that. But if you create a culture that doesn't let people actually contribute from their point of view, then you don't empower them, they don't keep contributing, and you don't get the benefit of those different experiences and different backgrounds, right? People feel repressed. I've fired management members over that kind of thing before because it's that important, right? People can leave your company, right? They have choices, and they will. So if you don't create an environment where people actually feel like the things that you're saying on your website are real, it doesn't matter if you print it on the wall. If a leader comes in and someone asks a question they don't like, and they, don't answer it, or they give a sarcastic answer, or that person seems like they get pushed to the side afterwards or whatever, if that is allowed to happen in the organization, then everyone else is going to feel like, well, I'm not sticking my neck out, right? So I think it's critical that the leadership creates a culture. And I would ask the team to hold leadership to account on that. I've had it. I know I've succeeded as a leader when someone on the team, random person number 7 on the team, says, I thought we were building this kind of organization, but when we did this, you did that, right? And I was like, you were right. I didn't do it because I didn't want to create that kind of culture. I did it for another reason, but the fact that you said something lets me deal with it and tell everyone that I'm dealing with it. That's a really healthy environment. People make mistakes. People have different perspectives. They aren't thinking about the impact, maybe something they do. So it really is critical. And at Protagonist Games, like to say, we're trying to create a forever home for unicorns, right? And that's what I aspire to, so.
Hello? Okay. So I'm actually working on a research paper right now on Latinx representation within video game culture. And one thing I found was in the 2020 Spider-Man Miles Morales game, it's great that he has great representation in his culture as a Puerto Rican and African American. But one important thing to know is that there's also no cops in that game, right? And so it doesn't embrace all the both good and bad things that the people there in Harlem experience. So I was wondering, how would you approach a character or a story trying to embrace every part of that character's culture?
Are we having a deep voice competition? No, it's a good question. I think that the challenge for creators is what are you trying to say? Like, what part are you trying to explore? So I had a mentor once who gave me really great advice. He said, Anthony, you've built an incredible team. I believe that you guys can do anything that you set out to do, but you cannot do everything you want to do, right? And it was like, I know that, but yes, that's really good advice. He's like, you have to focus and figure out what thing you're gonna do and do that really, really well. And so my answer to that question is you can't do everything. You can't tell the entire story. Everyone in this room is going through some shit that nobody knows about, right? And so people are complex and deep beings. So you have to decide, what are you trying to communicate in this game, in this story? And was there a reason, for example, in that case, that there are no cops in Harlem? Why, I'd be curious to know why the developers made that choice. Did they make that choice, or did they just not do it, not realizing they were making that choice? So that's my answer to your question is you have to decide what you think is important in the story and what you want to communicate and focus on those things and do them really well.
Is there an example of a game, either company and/or actual game, that you feel like is doing a good job in diversity? I'll give my opinion on one. I think the new Hogwarts Legacy, for me, seeing real black hairstyles done really well for the first time in a long time, so that made me really excited to play the game. So just curious if you thought if there's anyone.
You took my first answer. I agree with you. I think Hogwarts did a fantastic job. The character that I built reminds me of one of my daughters, and getting their hair texture right is not often an option, right? I think so there's Cyberpunk 2077 had some really great stuff in it. Well, my general comment is I think the industry is getting a lot better about representation and diversity in your choices. I'll also say I think maybe they're overdoing it sometimes, but that's another topic, I think, which is, right, like everything that we do as like commercial and consumer game developers should be about what best serves the audience that you're trying to reach. So I don't think virtue signaling helps. I think that doing it for the reason that you're trying to give people the choices that you want to give, or trying to tell the story that you're trying to tell, is important. But I think you can also go too far and you can alienate, people for no good reason. And so finding a way to give people the choices that make sense in the context of the world that you're creating is really important. But I agree with you. I think Hogwarts did a fantastic job.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
All right, saw one way in the back first. I'll get to you.
What kind of language would you use when you're casting that net to ensure that you're getting perspectives of people that don't necessarily align with your own?
Look, there's a lot of language that already exists in diversity, inclusion sort of universe, and you can see a lot of corporations are using that language a lot to try to signal that that's what they're looking for. I think most importantly is coming up with a sort of custom communication that shows that you've thought about it, right? You're not just saying, be human or whatever, right? So I gave you an example for protagonist games, right? It's the Forever Home for Unicorns, right? Like that immediately gives people an idea of, oh, we want people that are unique, and we're all on this little island of misfits, and we're all going to stick together, right? So I think that's really important. There's obviously a lot of marketing and things going into diversity now, and the question for the people you're recruiting is it real? So that's that cast a wide net outreach aspect of it, which is just like with my example of trying to get internships from HBCUs. It's you have to sort of go out and have a personal touch about it. You know, I'm not sure if I'm really answering your question, but that's kind of my philosophical answer to it. It kind of depends on each organization and how are they going to take specific things that they can message to an audience so that that audience receives the message as honest and real. So it kind of depends on your organization and maybe the kinds of communities you're targeting.
For companies that are pushing DEI and it comes across as more performative, do you think it's purely a breakdown of the culture up top that you're talking about, or are there other factors that you think are contributing to it not coming across as meaningful?
I don't want to get myself in trouble here because I know a lot of the people at the tops of these companies, but I do think it is a problem of leadership at the top. I think a lot of those people think they have to do something, and so the easiest thing is to hire someone and put them in charge of a budget and marketing. But you know, and certainly 7-10 years ago, I met a lot of people who had been hired, usually black, usually female, to be the head of the DIE initiative for some corporation. And they were usually very frustrated ladies, right? Because they had all this messaging and they had all this responsibility to try to do this thing, and they had no real budget, no real actual support. Some of that has changed, but I think it is large corporations catching up with the culture, and each one is different. You know, like I know the person in charge of that at Unity, and they're very serious about it, and they have a lot of support, and they do a lot of stuff. So not every corporation's the same either. But yeah, I think a lot of it is the people who run those companies at the top don't actually understand it, and they have to do something because they're publicly traded and it's important. But it's kind of like everyone jumping on the Black Lives Matter bandwagon and then jumping off, right, when no one was looking. So you have to look at each company and try to decide for yourself how serious they are about it.
What sort of advice would you have for people trying to get into the industry who might be coming from a background where they might have no financial opportunities for education or technology to sort of practice in advance? How would you recommend they go about finding their career path?
Yeah, there are a bunch of topics there. I'm trying to be specific to, I think, what you're asking me. Look, there are a lot of resources out there to teach yourself and get in. And the things like what's going on back there with all those arcade, games and events like this are exactly the things that you should do. I give you a little bit of my story. I was not studying game development. I was a molecular biology major when I dropped out of the University of Texas. I taught myself Unix scripting and got into writing bots on IRC in the early 90s, and that's how I kind of got into kind of a little bit of programming or whatever. But I went to a job fair, and I sat in a room for 4 or 5 hours at Origin until I realized they forgot me. I was the last person in the room and everybody had left. And I came out of this fishbowl and just the whole recruiting group was gone. So I got in the elevator, I went upstairs, punched the 3rd floor, came out and found myself on a Saturday morning in the QA department. They were working on Saturday. That should tell you something about the 90s. And no security because I was in their QA department. And the lady was like, can I help you? And I'm like, yeah, I'm here for the job fair. And they're like, yeah, that's over. And I'm like, yeah, you forgot me. Like, what? So she goes, do you want a job in QA? I said, okay. Can you start on Monday? Okay. So persistence is definitely important. Like, I could have just gone home. So I think networking like this, coming to meet people, the industry is very supportive of people who show their passion. So I understand that there's basic investments in having a computer and being able to pay for software and all that kind of stuff. There are grants out there, and there are organizations, both Unity and Unreal, for example, have organizations for game makers, grants, and opportunities out there. And then there are internships, and there should be paid internships. And you don't have to always be a student to get an internship. So I would look at those too. And talk to Donald. And talk to me. I'm up here after this. I'll have my QR code so we can get in touch. And I'm happy to help anyone get into the industry. That's why I came out. I didn't come out for South by Southwest. I came out here to help Donald with what you guys are doing. So, last one? Oh, we got two more. All right.
So, the longer an organization, the larger an organization gets, it seems like they tend to follow, it seems they can fall into pitfalls where it's like it becomes certain personality, certain type of person that's going to be in an organization. Like, I've been part of large companies before where it's like, oh yeah, we're open to everyone, but there's only one way you can interact. And a lot of people that, whether mental health background, whatever it is, it's difficult for them to interact in that way. Like, what do you do as a leader that gives that person the open floor to do that? And do you do like a refresh and accountability to make sure that those interactions can still happen?
That's a really good question. I think, so one thing that I do is, as a leader is I try to invest in external validation for our process, right? So, for example, our Protagonist games, we'd been around for about 2 or 3 years, and I hired a game industry consultant guy to come in and evaluate, our employee experience. It's a whole industry now of EX, right? And I thought we were doing a good job. But he came in and he interviewed everybody, and he came back with a whole bunch of feedback of things I could be doing better, right? And so I do think that it's important that organizations have some kind of a internal accountability and then some regular external that lets the whole team participate in that feedback loop. Because I can send an anonymous survey to the team and ask them how we're doing and stuff, but I know the team's like, is it really anonymous? And, am I asking the right questions and those kinds of things? So it is really important, and I think it's important for the employees to ask those questions. If you're already in a culture that's decent, you should be able to get those questions asked and then see some action be taken. Some organizations have a good HR department. You come to them with those kinds of questions, and they'll be like, that's a really good point. Or, hey, we have this thing that we have in place. Is it working for you? But if you're serious about building successful, diverse teams, it's something you have to continue to invest in. You can't just get it working and then assume it's going to keep working. You have to keep working at it.
We have one more.
Yep.
Last one.
Hi. Going back to casting your net, you were talking about going out into the community and kind of searching for talent. What would you say your percentage of hires for going out and scouting personally versus job postings and resume? And would you say that shifts with company size? How do you kind of grow that and keep it still diverse and personal?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's going to change as the organization scales, but if they're serious, if the organization's serious about it, they're going to hire people whose jobs it is to do that, to go out into those communities, right? So as you grow, ideally, you're going to continue to send people there. Now, there's a pragmatic kind of evaluation that a company has to do, especially a small one, about, how much effort do we spend trying to hit some kind of arbitrary number of some kind of diversity versus, hey, we need a software engineer to go do this, or we need an artist to do that. And that was an interesting thing for us to grapple with at HiDef, and we decided that if we focus on the right culture and the right strategy, we should end up with something that we're really happy with. And that has worked for the first year and a half, 2 years. So most people still come in through the traditional way of a job posting, but I think we've also been successful in finding people who wouldn't even have applied for those jobs. I found a guy who did all the social media and web design for one of the world's best singing artists, singers, African American, never worked in games, and is now a producer and a bit of a creative director on one of our projects. We were like, we're going to invest in helping him learn how to make games while we learn from him about the creative process that he learned from being in the music business. So I think it's a mix, and I think if you invest in it, it'll the ratio could still be 20% of the people are from people that you directly outreach to, while 80% are still going to come from LinkedIn job postings or whatever. All right, appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Quite an honor to have you on the stage, kicking this thing off. And I definitely wanted to present to you the ATX Game Makers Book of Talent.
Yeah, this is awesome.
This is, for all of you who don't know, that is a bunch of different entries from our community here at ATX Game Makers. We created a literal book of talent. So this is the diverse community. Whenever people come up and say, oh, hey, we can't find diversity and different folks to hire, well, hey, there's the book. Go hire them. So definitely encourage you guys to all join ATX Game Makers, which you can learn more about at atxgamemakers.com. Get in on the next version of that book. And then, Anthony, where can we find you?
Where can you find me? Castoro Gamer is usually my handle, so you can find me on Twitter, Discord, and at anthony@hidef.com.